Good afternoon. This is Joe Frisino at the Council on Accreditation. I'd like to welcome you to this afternoon's webinar, A Brief Introduction to COA Accreditation. I'll try to cover some real basics about COA. We're hoping at the end of this you'll be able to walk away with a few things, be able to describe COA and then some of the key things about the process which we think are unique and are information that's useful for you. You'll have a basic understanding of our process and know where to find more information about COA through the use of our website. This training applies to our private accreditation, our public agency accreditation, Canadian agency accreditation. It also, the basics in the structure of the process and applies also to our after-school accreditation and to our military and family readiness program accreditation. For the last two, some of the details may be different. Some of the timeframes may be different, and I'll make reference to that. But overall, the information is in, at least in its outline form, the same. It does not, however, apply to organizations who are seeking accreditation with our Hague Intercountry Adoption Accreditation Program. So for the most part, the content of this training will not apply. We're a nationally focused and increasingly internationally focused private non-profit accrediting body, okay? We've been in business for quite a number of years now, and were established in the late 70s. At the time, we were established by the Child Welfare League of America and the organization that is now the Alliance for Children and Families. They both had internal accreditation processes where they were accrediting their own members, and that began to sort of be a conflict for them. And so they jointly established COA. And from that point, our focus has really expanded. We have a number of sponsoring agencies, which we'll see in a little bit. And we've gone far beyond our initial roots as a child welfare accreditor. And we'll also take a look at that a little bit. And we do, at this point, pretty much accredit almost any kind of a program that, that's a community-based, a mental health or social service program that you might provide. And at this point also, we've got quite a number of agencies accredited or in process, 1,800 plus. I think the number is now closer to 2,000 at this point. So some of the things that I think are really, the key aspects, and as far as the characteristics of our accreditation process. First, this is an open and collaborative process. We take it as our role is to partner with organizations like yourself to go through the process and get you accredited. Okay, we're here through the entire time you're in the process. You'll have somebody assigned to you specifically who can answer questions and help you with issues in areas where maybe you really need some assistance. And again, we consider ourselves as partners with you through this process. Our accreditation is for 4 years. That is, I think that is unique amongst accreditors, at least certainly in our field. Typically, accreditation is for 3 years, but we have a 4-year accreditation, and I think that that's something that a lot of organizations are attracted to COA because of that. One thing you do need to know is once you decide to get accredited by COA, all of your programs and services will be reviewed. Okay, so if you provide group living services, case management, and adult day services, you can't come to COA and say, I want just my adult day services accredited, and please, we're not interested in case management and group homes. So, and there are some few exceptions to this, but generally, once you do make the commitment, you're bringing all of your programs and services through the process. The process itself takes 14 to 18 months for the typical organization, currently our military and family readiness program organizations, their full timeline is, I think it's closer to 10 to 12 months at this point. In the future, that may expand to the full regular process, but for the organizations in process now, you're on a year timeline. And so anyway, so you're with us for quite a while, and this is, you know, this is from the time you apply and officially begin the process. Typically, it's 14 to 18 months. And again, this gives us the opportunity, and gives you the opportunity, to work with us as you go through the standards and as you prepare each of the major milestones of the process. Another thing that I believe is unique is that our standards and all the significant accreditation material are free. They're available to anybody who wants to look at them through our website, and we really there's really nothing you need other than the fee. There's no hidden costs here as far as special tools you're going to have to buy. I mean, we have some trainings that we charge minimally for, and there are fees associated with the site visit, and we'll have a little bit more information about that toward the end. But standards are free, and you are encouraged. I'll show you where they are if you don't know where they are, and you are strongly encouraged to go there and take a look and see what COA is about. Also, I like to think of COA accreditation as an open book test, in which you know what the questions are and you're given all the answers. Once you dig deeper into this process and look at the standards, etc., you'll see that, I mean, there's no secrets here, right? You'll know what the standards are, you know exactly what evidence we're going to be looking for, what you need to produce, in other words, in order to show us that you've met the standards, and you'll understand how standards are rated, and you'll understand how the accreditation decision is made. So everything is there, and I think, again, I think that's one of the great aspects of our accreditation process. Now, we have standards for a lot of different types of services, as I suggested. Now, when you go to our website, the services are listed alphabetically. But I know that most organizations don't think of themselves as, simply as an adult day services provider. They think of themselves as, an adult services provider or a child and family services provider. So this slide and the one after it just broke out under categories of types of services, some of the service sections that apply. This is the for your information slide. I sent you the slides earlier, so hopefully you received them, and give you some time if you want to take a look at this in more detail, these slides, and let us know. If you have any questions, obviously, during the training, but also afterwards, you'll have my contact information if you want to contact me, and with follow-up questions. So you can see major categories of standards of child and family services, behavioral health care services, mental health, both mental health and substance abuse. We have a pretty full range of adult services that we provide, and homeless services, as well as an array of services for people who have developmental disabilities. And additionally, we have a couple of other accreditation business lines, for lack of a better word. We accredit networks and lead agencies. And once you look into the standards, you'll see there may be references to networks and lead agencies throughout the standards. We have about 40 organizations getting accredited as a network. And it often raises questions, but the basic thing to understand is you're probably not a network. Network standards apply to organizations who, for the most part, don't actually provide the direct services. What they do is they have a contract with typically the state to coordinate services for a given population, say persons with severe and persistent mental illness, and they do the contracting to other agencies and providers. We have a separate accreditation process for after-school programs, and I had also mentioned earlier the Hague Intercountry Adoption Programs. And this is related to an international treaty between the United States and most of the rest of the world through the State Department. And finally, we also have accreditation for military and family readiness programs as part of a contract we have with the Department of Defense. So just some more information for you. Are there any questions at this point yet? If you haven't been to our website, here's a screenshot of the homepage. And just in case, I put the web address in the red box in the upper corner. Some of you may have been around COA and maybe explored COA in the past. This website was put up new in August of last year. It combines our standards website with our old COANet information website. So it's all together now into one website where you know, all the information is about the standards, etc. I have a question, and it looks like we are under COA, an umbrella organization, COA accredited. We want our after-school program accredited. My question would be, are you like for example, a division of a larger accredited organization? Are you a separate? The central question is, do you have your own board? Are you a separate a not-for-profit or a separate legal entity? If you're a separate legal entity, then you would have to get a separately accredited. If you are not a separate legal entity from the umbrella organization, you may not even have to get separately accredited, and it may be that could be folded in. So a little more information we would need to tease that out. And probably it gets a little nuanced for this webinar, but the person to contact would be Zoe Hutchinson, and her contact information is on the last slide. But again, to be an accreditable entity, to be eligible for COA accreditation, you'll need to be a separate, legal entity. So chances are good you may already fall under the accreditation of the umbrella organization. But again, ask the question of Zoe, and she'll be able to really give you the answer. So here's the COA website, the homepage. I'm just going to give you some basic information about where to find things. The first drop-down menu, accreditation, you can see there's a lot of basic information about who we are, an overview of the accreditation process, how to apply, what the eligibility criteria are, information about fees and other things. So this is a good place to start if you are interested in the process itself, okay? If you want to understand what the standards say, most importantly, before you begin to make a decision, then the drop-down menu under the Standards tab is where you would start. And you can see here there are links to the various accreditation business lines that I mentioned before: private organizations, standards for public organizations, Canadian, etc. If you do happen to be a network or a lead agency and you would be seeking accreditation as a network, the standards for networks are folded into the private and public agency standards. So there's not a separate book of standards for them. However, the application process has, there's some unique questions, and the process itself is a little unique for you. So again, if you are seriously considering applying, then contact Zoe, and she'll be able to walk you through that part of the process. Another really important place to know about is our training and resources part of the website, and you've probably all of you already been to the training calendar. So, and I think that would be that's the important at this early stage for you, that's the important place to know about. We post new trainings all the time, and right now we're going through a big effort to create recorded versions of some of these webinars, self-paced trainings. And we've been populating the training calendar with those at a rate of 1 or 2 a month. So keep your eyes open over there for some I think, and they're really well done, I think, and really designed to take sometimes some complicated topics and make them really understandable. So keep your eye on the training calendar. Just one other thing I want to point out, and I don't have a separate slide on it. You'll see on this slide, all the way over toward the right, who is accredited. There's other ways to get to that information, but you can go and click on that tab and search for other, basically accredited organizations by state, and find out who else is accredited. If you want to talk to somebody about their experiences, talk to another organization. That's a good way to do it, and find out who in your area might be, or agencies that are similar to yours in size or in service array, etc. So that's also a part of the website. I think would be good for you to understand what it's about and where it is. Okay, I'll assume that if you have questions, you'll be asking them. So I'm going to talk just a little bit about the benefits of accreditation. Most of you are here because you're interested in accreditation already. You have some idea about what this is about. And I don't know if you're here exploring the concept, or you've already made a commitment to getting accredited by somebody and you want to see what COA it has to offer. But I mean, there's a lot of benefits, and in some cases it depends on where you are and what your goals are and why you're getting accredited. But I think these are some of the things that I think are really important. And first and foremost, apart from external recognitions, etc., I think one of the greatest benefits of getting accredited is what you will learn by undergoing the in-depth self-evaluation that is at the core of the accreditation process. You've got a number of standards to review, and you've got to compare how you do business in your practices against the standards. And we have standards that pretty much cover all aspects of how organizations function. So in the process of getting accredited, you'll pretty much open up all those closets, right, and all those cabinets throughout your organization and really look at all aspects of how you function. One of the things that people tell us that one of the benefits that a result of that is finally writing down and getting on paper, all their policies and procedures and how they do things. All the ways they were functioning informally, going through this process stimulates them, or requires them in many ways, to formalize those things. And so I really think that this is where, indeed, if you really take the process to heart, you can really gain the most benefit. The accreditation process, just by going through it, the standards really cluster, and especially in our management and operational sections, cluster around capacity building and aspects of functioning that by strengthening them, you will strengthen your organization. Okay, we really do cover most aspects of how management of organizations occurs. And you will be asked to really go through your policies and procedures and vet them against what is considered to be known best practices. Okay. The standards where there is research, the research has been reviewed. Okay, we have a regular process where we maintain and try to stay on top of current practices. A lot of the management sections, there's not a lot of research based because there's not a lot of research. but the management standards are based on what I would call basically common business practices that have been built up over the years by thousands and thousands of for-profit, not-for-profit organizations. We do have expert panels that contribute to these, and so we feel they do represent best practices, okay, for the management and operations and the functioning of social service providing agencies. And this can be a selling point to your staff, selling point to your funders, that you have, in fact, met, nationally recognized standards. And in that, it comes, an external validation of how you do business, of your practices. And that sort of organization, a team of people have come in, looked at how you do things, and has evaluated you and giving you, quote unquote, a seal of approval. And that's very important for some people, and it's very important sometimes for staff morale. And there's a lot of ways, again, you can market your accreditation. And again, the sky's the limit in many ways. Now, once an organization becomes accredited, there's a survey that we have them fill out. One of the questions is, how has COA accreditation benefited your organization? And we give them, a number of different options, and they can rate themselves, rate with, agree or strongly agree, et cetera, on a number of these areas. This chart represents over 1,200 individual responses, and over the course of about 5 years, 6 years. So we think there's a lot of data here, and that this is actually representative of how accredited organizations believe that COA has benefited them. So you'll see the red bars represent responses that agree or strongly agree. And I won't go through these, certainly not all of them. I'll talk about a couple of them, but again, this is one of the reasons I wanted you to have the slides, is so you can actually look at this slide, for example, and really look at it and think about it and give you some time to reflect upon it. But you'll see a couple of things here. Improves the bottom bar, 93% of organizations agree or strongly agree that having become COA accredited, it proves their accountability and transparency. The same number goes for enhancing organizational learning and knowledge. Okay, so take a look at these. And one thing I want to point out is, this is not a satisfaction survey. Okay, you can answer all of, agree, strongly agree, or disagree, et cetera, on all of these. So the lowest, the shortest bar here improves staff recruitment and retention. 45% agree or strongly agree that COA accreditation has directly benefited them in that area. Now, if this is a satisfaction survey, maybe that might not look so great. However, knowing how difficult an issue this is, right? Knowing how difficult it is to recruit qualified staff and keep them, I think that 45% of our agencies who positively assert that this has helped them, I think is a great achievement. I don't know, there's not that many factors that can really affect that. So I think that's something I think that might. Again, I want to go through this so you can really think about how to interpret this information. So again, they could have, so take a look at it. You'll have the chart. Another benefit of COA accreditation is we have recognition at this point, I believe, in one form or another in all 50 states. Okay, and here's a sample of our recognition in the state of Ohio. There is a section of the website called Recognitions, and that's where you can go and search state by state to see if there are any recognitions that apply to you. Okay, so, but for example, in Ohio, our after-school program accreditation is recognized by the Ohio Department of Job and Family Services. The Ohio Department of Mental Health recognizes COA accreditation for mental health programs. You can see there's also federal recognition of residential treatment facilities in of COA, and that's and Ohio has opted into that, and is substance abuse, the Department of Alcohol and Addiction Services. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean COAs are recognized and CARF and JCO are not, but in some cases that is the case. But in many cases, it's a recognition of accreditation. You have to apply to become an approved accreditor. But again, here's an example, and you'll see here. And I'm not an expert in the nuances between the different types of recognition. If you go to the recognitions page, you'll find information about that. But just roughly, tiered reimbursement typically means that an accredited organization is reimbursed at a higher rate for services delivered than non-accredited organizations. Deemed status, which is the second one you'll see under the first one under mental health, typically means that if an accredited organization is deemed, quote unquote, by the state to be in compliance with some portion of the regulations that typically apply to your program or organization. So in some cases, it might mean that the state will come out and review your records once a year instead of twice a year. Or they won't look at certain things because they're assuming you're accredited. They'll assume that COA has already checked that and that you've met those requirements. Or again, they might not check them as frequently. Contractor mandates, I think, are probably obvious. There are requirements to be accredited in many jurisdictions for certain kinds of programs. Many of you, some of you at least, may be under an accreditation mandate. And that's just a few. Those are the major categories of recognitions, but they do vary from state to state. Every state probably has a different definition of what's deemed under deemed status. Because they have different regulations. They're maybe more concerned about certain things than others. So I would encourage you to go to the recognitions part of the website, explore that as part of your thinking about whether COA is the appropriate accreditor for you. We also have a number of sponsor organizations. And if you're a member of one of these organizations, for example, the National Council for Adoption or Volunteers of America, then you're eligible for a 25% discount on your accreditation fee. And I don't know, depending how large your organization is, that can be a substantial amount. So it would be hard to slip past, the application process and if you're a member and not have that be raised as far as, applying the discount or not. But again, if you're thinking about this, you're comparing COA to other accreditors, and to the extent that cost is a factor, which it is to some extent for everybody, factor that in, and if you're a member of one of these sponsors. It's also the case that sometimes someone who has been on the fence, an organization about becoming a member, of joining a sponsor, say, you've wanted to join the Child Welfare League of America, but maybe the fee may be hard to justify. But when you factor in the 25% discount you'll get on your accreditation fee by being a member, there may be an economy here that makes sense now. Just something to think about. In addition to sponsor organizations, and these organizations have taken a very active interest in COA, we have recognitions from a variety of other sources, okay? And again, without going through this is a for-your information slide. We have a number of supporting organizations. Now, these are organizations that recognize COA and endorse COA to their members without necessarily making the investment in COA that results in the discount for members on their accreditation fees. And on the right side, you'll see we have partnerships with a number of organizations, and all for a variety of reasons. So if you're interested in any of these, let me know, and we'll give you some information about it, or you can talk to Zoe about it as you enter the process, or if you want to talk to her about a little bit more of the details about how to get in. But again, this is a list of other organizations that do endorse COA, And generally, they have looked at our standards and our process and said, yep, we think these guys are good, and we encourage you to get accredited. Now, what I'm going to do now is do a brief overview of the process. Okay, and as I said before, the accreditation process typically will take 14 to 18 months from start to, from application to decision. And again, some of our other accreditations, like our military accreditation, they run a shorter time frame, and I think our after-school accreditation is as well. First thing I want to say is when you enter the process officially, and you've gone through your basic intake, which we'll discuss a little bit, you will be assigned an internal COA accreditation coordinator who will work with you from that point throughout the process. They'll be your single point of contact with COA for the most part. You, on your end, you will also be asked to designate a single point of contact, so that for the most part, communications between your organization and COA throughout the process, with some exceptions, but largely will occur person to person, one-on-one. On the COA's end, your COA coordinator, as you can see, they're here to answer your questions, guide you through the process. They'll look at, they may look at a draft of something if you'd like them to. They'll connect you and make recommendations for resources, whether the training resources, etc., and generally advise you about some of the important milestones and deadlines and due dates, as well as all things related to your self-study, and which is really one of the major milestones of the process, and I will discuss that in just a moment. Broadly speaking, there are 7 steps in the process, and I indicated this as a circle because on the top you see starting the process, right, signing your accreditation agreement, and then it circles back, and hopefully after you've been accredited and you've gone through your 4 years, that you will consider that it's been really worth it, and you'll go through the process again. So let me break this down a little bit. It begins with an online application. One of the things with the new website is that now pretty much all paperwork is done online. There's very little, I don't know if there's any actual hard copy forms for you to fill out, etc. So you apply, your eligibility for COA accreditation is discussed and verified. You sign your accreditation agreement, pay your fee, and then you are in the process. At that point, you are referred to intake. Intake is the first really important milestone. It typically will occur a couple of weeks after you sign your agreement. It's this point where you will bring forward all the programs you provide, and you'll sit down with our intake specialist, who will then work with you to match each of those programs with the appropriate section of service standards. This is really important that this be done accurately, and mostly it is. Very rarely, maybe once or twice a year, we'll get all the way to the site visit, and the reviewers will realize, okay, wrong standards for this program. That can be relatively disruptive to the site visit, as you might imagine, but it happens rarely. But again, it's a very important early step. Also at intake, some of the other important dates and milestones will be established, most important of which is your site visit date. And also at this point, you'll have a due date for your self-study evidence to be submitted to COA. And I'll discuss that in just a moment. Now, the self-study phase, this is where the accreditation if really occurs. This is where you and your staff, over the course of 6 to 12 months, maybe shorter depending, and if you need more time, it's possible to negotiate. But over the course of, the period of time leading up to the site visit, you will be sitting down and really looking at all aspects of how you function and comparing that with the standards. Okay. 6 to 8 weeks before the site visit, you will be submitting what we call the self-study. I mean, the term used to, when you used to have to submit binders of things, that actually seemed like a single big thing, a big document. Now it's all done online, but we still call it your self-study. And this is a fair number of policies, procedures, and other documentation that is submitted to COA, as I said, ahead of the site visit. And that way, your peer review team gets a head start on looking at your documentation. By the time the site visit comes, they're pretty familiar with how you function. And so the submission of the self-study is a very, very important moment in your accreditation process. And it's really, the first real milestone that organizations celebrate that they've achieved. So this is the heart of the process, the self-study process. So as I said, 6 to 8 weeks after you submit your self-study, you have the site visit. Typical site visit, there's a minimum of 2 to 3 peers come on site for 2 to 3 days. It tends to be 2 for 2 days is the absolute minimum, but it varies depending on how large you are, how many services you have, depending on geographical dispersion, right? We have some agencies. We have one agency, a private agency with 180 plus individual program sites scattered across 2 very large states. So this organization, their site visit, can require 5 peers for 5 days. Teams that have to go, scooting around all over 2 different states. But typically it's 2 to 3 peers for 2 to 3 days. Once they get on site, they will have looked at, as I said earlier, through your self-study submission, they'll have already seen a lot of documentation. They'll come on site and continue to do some documentation review. But largely what they're going to be doing when they're there is conducting interviews with your staff and your board if you're a not-for-profit and other stakeholders, and visiting the program sites, looking at looking at your programs in operation, observing staff and clients working together, etc. So this really is probably the most significant milestone in the process. Before the reviewers leave, they will submit their findings to COA, and you'll get a report. I'm not sure what the time frame is now. I know it's within 20 business days, and I think it's getting down to closer to 10 business days. But somewhere in that time frame, you'll get a report with findings, and it'll summarize what the reviewers found. And if you still need to do additional work, which many, in fact, the majority of organizations still do, the report will provide very specific recommendations for what you still need to do, and you will still have another couple of months to work on issues that's going to be resolved before you go before our Accreditation Commission. The Accreditation Commission is the body that is authorized to make accreditation decisions, and they will review the original report from the peer team. They will review your response to the report that you were sent, and then they will make a decision about your accreditation. Following that, once you got your accreditation decision, you go into what we call our maintaining or maintenance of accreditation phase, where you are accredited now and you stay on top of the standards. You maintain your accreditation. You maintain implementation of the standards. There'll be an annual maintenance of accreditation report you'll submit, and then hopefully you will decide you'll get a letter from us 18 months prior from your expiration date and asking you if you want to re-up and go through the process again. 18 months prior from your expiration date and asking you if you want to re-up and go through the process again. 18 months prior from your expiration date and asking you if you want to re-up and go through the process again. 18 months prior from your expiration date and asking you if you want to re-up and go through the process again. 18 months prior from your expiration date and asking you if you want to re-up and go through the process again. 18 months prior from your expiration date and asking you if you want to re-up and go through the process again. 18 months prior from your expiration date and asking you if you want to re-up and go through the process again. 18 months prior from your expiration date and asking you if you want to re-up and go through the process again. 18 months prior from your expiration date and asking you if you want to re-up and go through the process again. 18 months prior from your expiration date and asking you if you want to re-up and go through the process again. 18 months prior from your expiration date and asking you I'm going to take a quick look. It looks like we have a question. Doug asks, we're still about 2.5 years out from our next reaccreditation visit. Is there a tool that facilitates completing a self-assessment in regard to our current level of compliance? Let me think about that. There's not one single overarching tool to accomplish that. There are a number of tools that can be used, I think, for this. We have various worksheets, right? Like there's a worksheet, documentation of training worksheet, where all the standards in the management sections and the service delivery administration sections, where it's training requirements. It lists the standard, it lists the content, and there's columns where you can for individual staff members, you can slot in dates. Where the training was received. So there's focus tools like that. But as far as an overarching self-assessment tool, there actually isn't one. One strategy that some organizations use is that they keep their accreditation committees together, right? So most organizations, when they enter the accreditation process, begin the self-study phase, they form various committees to look at different things. Facilities, a facility committee, maybe combined, also looks at risk management. There may be a human resources committee that also looks at training issues. As you're going through the self-study process, some organizations keep those formed, and on an annual basis, we'll do a review. That committee will come back together because they're already familiar with the standards that they've looked at, and they'll just see, where are we? Are we still on top of things? Have there been changes to the COA standards in the past year that we should know about and then that we would want to implement now ahead of it? So hopefully that's helpful. If any of you who are on the training are already already accredited organizations, and you have other thoughts about staying on top of compliance and implementation, I feel it'd be great if you have some ideas about what works for you to share them with us through the chat box. And Doug, if you have any, I don't know if you've been in the tool search area of the website, to look for specific tools. There are, again, a number of tools. I've also recently created a document of recommended tools, at least regarding the self-study process. So we'll have some additional functionality about that built into your MyCOA portal later. But for the time being, if you would like that, I can send that to you. And actually, maybe what I'll do is I'll just, if you would like that, send me an email, and I'll reply with the tool attached. It might be more than most of you actually want, as far as you're still thinking about COA accreditation. But just send me an email, and I'll forward that back to you. Here's a table, a time chart of the significant process milestones. Okay, we're not going to go through this. This is for your information. I just added this earlier because I thought this might be useful for some of you. And these are, some of these are technical milestones. So I don't want to go through them because it would mean a deeper, deeper dive into the process than I think is warranted for this introductory training. But I know some of you are coming back or maybe have more experience. And so for you, this might be useful. So I give it to you. I take a look at it. And if you have questions, feel free to contact me. So let me transition into the standards. I like to think of the standards as rigorous, relevant, and realistic. Okay, rigorous meaning that they are meant to be a challenge, right? These standards are meant to push you to, function better, function at a higher level. And again, they're meant to be a challenge. Relevant meaning that we strive to make our standards current and keep them relevant to the programs and services you are currently delivering, and have a field, the current thinking in the field about practices. As I said earlier, we do have our standards development process it keeps it on top of the literature, the evolving literature in the field. But one of the ways which relevancy is we stay on top of is through feedback from you and organizations going through the process. Right? Some of you looked at literature, and yes, under very strict conditions, if you have certain staff with certain training and certain caseload ratios, yes, you can be predictable that you're going to you might achieve certain outcomes. But that's not always practical. So despite the fact that we do look at that and incorporate that as we can, relevancy, a lot of it comes from you telling us this works, this is how we do things, this is how the field is evolving, et cetera, et cetera. So we really do count on you to be part of the standards development process in this way. Finally, their standards are realistic, meaning that they are achievable. Right? Thousands of organizations of every possible size have met these standards, and have achieved accreditation. So again, I would keep this in mind. Also keep in mind that the standards themselves can be seen as goal statements. Without going into the nuances of how you're going to be, how you're rated by the reviewers, there is nobody has to be perfect. Okay, you don't have to get the highest rating on all the standards to become accredited. You don't even have to pass all of the standards to be accredited. So, but of course, you have to understand how, what's required, what's not required, and it's one of the obligations I think you're going to want to take on early, is to really understand how the scoring is done, how the ratings are done, how decisions are made. But again, keep in mind that we're not asking you to be perfect. No organization, or very few organizations, pass every single standard, after the site visit. But again, you need to know, and they're accredited, so you need to know how the system works. Also, something to understand about the standards is we write them to describe, we try to focus on what it is COA wants of you, and to the extent that we can do it, we try to leave the how you do it to you. Okay? So, for example, any given standard in the management sections, a standard like ETH 101, which talks about open and transparent operations, that standard, with its 15 or so words, applies to the 10-person rural counseling agency. The same standard, the same 15 words, applies to the 5,000 staff person, $100 million agency. So the what is the same between those two organizations. What that's going to look like, how that's achieved in those two very different organizations is going to be completely different. This is what I see as the essence of when we talk about contextual accreditation, right? Standard applies to both organizations, but what that looks like at the organization on the ground is going to be completely different. So keep that in mind also. Now, as I said earlier, to find the standards, go into the standards drop-down menu on the top of every page. And once you open up one of the sections, and the example here is the standards for public agencies, there typically are 3 categories of standards: administration and management standards, service delivery administration, and service standards. Okay, and here's this next slide sort of breaks down the major subcategories. So you'll see on the left under administration and management standards, we have standards about ethical practices that might include conflict of interest issues and fundraising, ethical fundraising practices, other professional practices. We have a section on financial management and governance, which is addresses issues related to the board and board functioning as well as executive functioning. And you can see as you go down what the major categories of standards are. Every one of these categories is broken up into several subcategories. So if you're not familiar with the standards, I think it'd be a great exercise. Go there. When this webinar is over, if you have not yet looked at the standards, go take a look. And while it's fresh in your mind, if you have questions, contact me. Second category, major category, you see on the top right, service delivery administration standards. These are management practices, but they tend to take place at the program level. It's not 100%, pure in that way. Just as in the administration and management sections, which typically describe more purely management functions, there are still, some crossover. But largely, both of these two first categories are management sections of standards. Lastly, we have service standards, and with the private agencies and Canadian and the public, there's, I think, now 49 sections of standards, distinct sections of standards, under which we can accredit approximately 130 distinct types of programs. Now, these vary, okay? So what you see here is for private, public, and Canadian. If you were a military and family readiness program, you'd have 3 categories of administration and management standards instead of 7. You'd have, I think you have about 8 service sections of standards instead of 49, because you have a very specific program, right? A very specific accreditation process and a separate set of standards. But these are the major categories that exist regardless of the type of accreditation you're seeking. Now, as I said, we have any number of sections of standards for specific services, and they do vary greatly between section to section, as you might imagine. But they're all also structured around a common framework. And virtually all of the service standards are structured around this framework or a similar framework, where we start out with standards about access and outreach to the community. Basically, how do people get into your program? Going through the assessment and service planning process, right down to case closing and aftercare and follow-up as necessary, and then they will all have a section of standards about staff. And in the personnel section, you'll find standards about if there are qualification standards or education or training, specific training standards. In some cases, there'll be standards about caseload size and those kinds of things. So just, it gives you some information about how the standards are structured before you will look. And again, if you have questions, contact me. So we're just about done. Information about fees can be found under the Accreditation tab, and you'll see 1, 2, 3, 4 down, fee information. I'm not an expert on the fees. That is something that if you contact Zoe, she will be able to talk to you about in detail. And under the next steps, you can see there's 3 categories. One is speak with Zoe. And she can give you a cost estimate about the accreditation fee, and you can request an initial assessment of your service standards, which means you can give her the types of programs you have, and she'll forward that to the standards department, and they can preliminarily tell you what they think with sections of standards they think that these programs will be assigned to. I mean, it's not final until you go through actual intake. We talked about going to the standards website, going to the website and looking at the standards. You also might want to take a look at the accreditation guidelines, which once you enter any section of standards, a link to the accreditation guidelines you'll see that on the side, and that's really an overview of the process in more detail than I've given you, and some hints about how to start, how to organize yourself. Thanks for attending,